Hey folks, good afternoon and welcome to Pride and Protection. We're library workers in a polarized cultural landscape, a free virtual program co-sponsored by the Rainbow Roundtable and the Social Responsibilities Roundtable, or CERT. CERT believes that libraries and librarians must center social responsibility by recognizing and helping to solve social problems and inequities to work for the common good. I'm your moderator, Michaela Prederati, and today I'm joined by Kim Krupka, who will be moderating the chat and looking out for any questions you may have during the program. Now, before I introduce today's speaker, there are a few housekeeping items to address. To enable captions, click More in the bottom right of your screen and then click Show Captions. Our session today will be recorded, and the recording will be available on our website within a few weeks and emailed to registrants. Please keep your cameras and mics off unless you're a presenter or posing a question during our Q&A portion. Please be respectful and extend care and compassion to yourself and others. We will have time for questions and answers after our presentation is concluded. Please use the Q&A Zoom feature to post questions and reserve the chat section for any relaying any tech issues, resource shareouts, or just saying appreciation for our panelists. You can pop your questions into the Q&A as the presentation is rolling. You don't need to wait until they're completed with the presentation to do so. Now, without any further ado, here's our second session of today's Pride and Protection program, Outreach for LGBTQIA+ patrons during the Culture Wars, presented by Allison Madar, Research, Instruction, and Outreach Librarian at SUNY Oswego. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you so much, Michaela. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here today. So today I'm going to present about 2S LGBTQIA-focused outreach during the Culture Wars. And as we continue on, I'm going to summarize 2S LGBTQIA into the phrase queer and trans folk to simplify things, but this phrase is meant to be all-encompassing for the entire spectrum of the diverse gender identities and sexualities. And so let's get started with a brief poll. So please put your answers in the chat. What is your biggest concern or fear about hosting queer and trans-focused events? Patron backlash, physical concerns, danger, trolls, pushback, violence, bad actors, attendance, outing yourself, concerns for being a risk to the larger workplace, harm, serious violence, including stalking. Yeah, so it sounds like we have a number of different concerns out there. Doxing, great concern. Not that this is good that that's happening, but valid. So thank you all so much for answering this vulnerable question. We're going to refer back to this a couple of times through the presentation. So let's get started with a brief overview of what this presentation will include. So we're going to just describe what the culture wars are, the fundamentals of grassroots advocacy, planning queer and trans-focused events even during this cultural moment, supporting your queer and trans colleagues when you are hosting these events and potentially receiving backlash as a result. Then we'll go into Q&A in our open discussion section. So, breaking down the culture wars. Right now, this cultural moment can feel insurmountable. Threats of counter-protests, book bans, physical violence, violence to other staff can make it difficult to do our jobs. Suddenly, something as commonplace as buying a book for your collection becomes an act of bravery. So let's begin by breaking down what the culture wars are. So, the culture wars through history. To be able to perform queer and trans-focused outreach in times like these, we may benefit from understanding the cultural dynamics at play. So the Culture Wars, The Struggle to Define America by James Davison Hunter, I'm holding it up in my camera right here, is the book that coins the term the Culture Wars. Hunter describes a 200-year history of division in the United States, which has taken many forms over 2 centuries. Hunter describes that the division is not necessarily left or right, but the impulse towards orthodoxy and the impulse towards progressivism. The impulse towards orthodoxy involves following an external authority, which can take the form of what one's parents taught them, what schooling taught them, or what they believed from authority figures in their religions. Progressivism follows rationalism and subjectivism. It believes in logicking out a problem and focusing on solving existing problems through change. So let me give a historic example. Around the 1840s and 1850s, droves of Irish people were immigrating to America. Previously, America had been a predominantly Protestant country. The majority of Irish immigrants were Catholic. So for over a century later, the divide between Protestants and Catholics was palpable through systemic discrimination against Catholics and Irish people. The Orthodox impulse against the new divided people in systemic, individual, and severe ways otherwise. But now we have a widely celebrated St. Patrick's Day, often celebrated regardless of if you're Irish. And, a holiday celebrated to focus on a marginalized group sounds a little familiar. Slide. So those are the sweeping movements of the culture wars, but what about the minutiae? This graph here is from Banaszak and Anderson's 2016 article explaining the dynamics between the women's movement and the conservative movement in the United States. In it, it depicts the frequency of protests from the women's movement and the conservative movement from 1960 to 1995. This article and diagram suggests that one movement will typically increase activity in response to the other's activity. It's typically a series of increasing counter-protests. To put it differently, nothing brings activists together like seeing opposing viewpoints gain traction, notoriety, or having successfully written laws or policies. Hunter wrote this quote, "It is important to stress that willful intention is not really a factor in the emergence of these ideological scapegoats. Rather, these developments are systemic, part of a natural collective response to the threat of the community's own structural insecurity and moral instability." So what does that mean? To put it differently, this is to say that opposing viewpoints gaining traction, notoriety, and policies can threaten our sense of moral justice or our community's sense of being free to be who we are. To point to a modern example of this, think of all the messaging you may have heard that implies that they will change our way of life, or they're a threat to our values, or similar themes of cultural colonization, even if there is or isn't existing colonization happening. These messages indicate that people are concerned about their community's power being usurped and being forced to do things that do not align with their values. So now that we understand the trends through history, what about the current state of the culture wars? There's probably an entire presentation worth of information to be said about the current power grab being taken by orthodox-leaning mindsets, but to focus on libraries and direct impacts on libraries, we have groups outside of library communities coordinating, contacting staff about queer and trans programming or collections. It's a distinctly coordinated effort using astroturfing, which, if you haven't heard of that, is a strategy used to inflate perceptions of disagreement, per Cho et al., cited in Kinsey et al. You might notice that you have angry callers who tend to follow a script, and thus are likely or organized by somebody else. You might notice that social media comments appear seconds after posts, and therefore they might be bots rather than human beings. And we also know of the rise of organized movements rooted in orthodoxy, such as Project 2025. I've mentioned that orthodoxy may respect authority, but in this cultural moment, the identity of the authority has been challenged and is changing. Particularly a few decades ago, you would ask a doctor if you had a medical question. You might trust the news to be a news source, or you would ask a specialist or academic. All of these professions have been challenged, and the seeds of distrust have been sown to not believe these professions as authority. For some Orthodox people, authority appears to be pulled into a couple of trusted sources and people. This dynamic is long and complex for our purposes, but if you're interested in further research, I recommend looking into the culture of cults. So back to libraries and the culture wars, just an important side note there. Book challenges are at an all-time high. Again, there is a coordinated effort against libraries representing certain populations and perspectives. So how does this affect libraries? Certainly, it could lead to censorship in our collections if books are successfully banned. Worse, it could lead to self-censorship if we are afraid to even select a book or to host a program out of concerns for backlash against us, our colleagues, or so forth. But the point of all of this historic information is to say, this battle isn't new, but neither is advocacy. The culture wars have been raging for a long time. It's just that the targets have changed. Despite the current sense of fear that many of us may have, this fight is not new. We need to remember what worked in the past, learn from past mistakes, and apply these lessons to our librarianship. To quote Jennings Roche and Yeager, rather than succumbing to helplessness, the response is to do something, take a step, find your work, and commit to it. So let's learn from past successes. Grassroots advocacy has pushed movements into successful policies or into majority acceptance into the public conscious. Some examples are abolitionism, suffrage, desegregation, or legalizing same-sex marriage. You could use grassroots advocacy skill sets to stand up for ourselves and our freedom to share uncensored information, and our freedom to plan queer and trans outreach events. So, what does this mean for library staff? Your library may wish to remain neutral, but librarianship is not neutral. All of your decisions shape your library record. Take a moment and imagine that all queer and trans books are censored in libraries, events are banned, and staff are forced into the closet and into conformity. What happens then? Suicide rates go up, people are isolated, and librarians lose the right to value our entire community. And I think that kind of image can inspire most of us to continue our work as advocates, especially in times like these, even if we may have threats against us. So we must be careful not to be act fragmented in our activism, though, as orthodox viewpoints hold serious power in this moment. Instead, we must unify our efforts to prevent being squashed, for lack of a better term. Hunter states, we have seen a huge expansion in the number of people who derive their livelihoods from the economics of knowledge, information, ideas, and the like. Libraries as information centers are the key to this current information ecology, for one, so of course we have to keep our freedom of information. This also means that we have a unique opportunity to appeal through logic to more people. Our culture is polarized, there's no denying that. So how do we shift our culture away from an us versus them mentality towards an open dialogue that will humanize the other party to the other party? Walter Lippmann once wrote, "The toleration of differences is only possible on the assumption that there is no vital threat to the community." We must emphasize that our activism does not mean that anyone has to do anything. It just means that everyone is free to choose the life they want to live. Be it a conversation about a book challenge or something else, Hunter also recommends that when you offer dialogue on the situation, ensure that your dialogue is level-headed and logical so that it cannot be portrayed as extremism. Remember, by stubbornly welcoming all people into the library, we can choose to engage in larger conversations when we have the capacity to. Right. So I've described that grassroots advocacy is key to this movement and key to being free to host our events. So let me get into how this works and what I mean by grassroots advocacy. Step 0 for grassroots advocacy is being brave in every opportunity that we have. But we must understand that every opportunity that we have means different things to different people in different situations. So let's start with something everyone can do. Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, I'm holding up to the camera, offers lessons about tyrannical governments. Step number 1 in this book, do not obey in advance. Remember that certain actions are meant to inspire fear and to lead to self-censorship and obeying at all costs of what our values are. Do not obey in advance. Instead, continue to advocate for queer and trans people however you can. I made a handy-dandy little image here. How you can plus when you can equals every time you can. So what do I mean by that? How you can is knowing your individual strengths and limits. If you are a quiet person, you might not want to confront the bigot right in front of you, but you can direct them to your colleague who loves to advocate, or direct them away from harassing another colleague by interrupting the conversation, or comfort your colleague afterwards and affirm their identity. Know yourself and follow through. When you can is about knowing your situation and picking your battles. If you're in a deeply read area, you might not want to host a drag story time. Instead, you can find quieter and smaller ways to normalize diverse genders and sexualities, or you can find that perfect moment or worthwhile battle to fight, even if you know you might receive backlash. With these two factors in mind, that is how you know you're every time you can. Know yourself, know your situation, and act every time accordingly. So in general, how do you do grassroots advocacy? What are the steps to it? So grassroots advocacy is developing a movement on behalf of a unified cause, often political. Step 1 is to determine your end goals and create manageable steps towards these goals. Step 2 is to develop a network of support. Step 3 is to advertise your cause, create slogans, share stories, and spread your mission statement. Step 4 is to create opportunities to advocate. Don't be afraid to stand tall and to use backlash as an opportunity to advocate. Step 5 is to contact legislators to secure rights. And the continuous step number 6 is to grow and develop your advocacy skills and never give up. So how do you apply these skills to your work and to your outreach initiatives? You may want to connect with like-minded groups and individuals in your community. You can create opportunities to share your message. You can control your own narrative. And if you have the capacity and bravery, you can emphasize that your library is a place for open discourse so that people can realize each other's humanity in the process. However, that's quite an undertaking, but if you can be the one with that capacity, stellar, you can open that conversation. I'll get into more detail about doing each of these in the following bullet points, or each of these bullet points in the following slides. So we are finally here. We've broken down how the culture wars work, how it's extremely old, how grassroots advocacy works in general. So now let's apply all this background information into our outreach. So much like setting learning objectives in a lesson plan, it can be helpful to set outreach objectives. I've listed a few examples of objectives for queer and trans-focused events, including welcoming the whole community into the library, not just the majority, welcoming queer and trans people out of the closet and into the library, opening the community conversation about the binary and spectrum of gender identities, and many more. So developing a network of support. I've mentioned that before that creating a unified front will be key to keeping your cause and freedoms alive. Here are some ways to create a unified front on a community level scale. First, you will want to generate administrative buy-in. By getting your bosses, supervisors, and higher-ups to support your event, you will know that your job is not on the line and that you will have library-wide backing. You could do this in a variety of ways, but you can ask repeatedly or even be a little pushy to insist that this is a valuable event that is worth happening because it welcomes more people into the community and into the library, so on and so forth. I've listed that generating staff support can be helpful. One way it can help is that if your administration won't accept your upcoming drag storytime proposal, having a group of staff members in support of your event may help your cause. It also means that colleagues will be prepared to handle backlash as a unit rather than having things fall all on your head. You are a team and you can all work together. Another useful tip is to create or revise policies to support staff. So if an upset patron comes in, you can lean on the don't harass staff policy to exit the conversation. And finally, develop support outside of the library so you can collaborate with local LGBT organizations, activists, or out and proud patrons. You don't have to do this alone. So advertise depending on your community and concerns. Back to the how you can, when you can, is every time you can. Advertise with wisdom. You can advertise using the usual methods, which is great for normalizing diverse genders and sexualities. However, in this current cultural moment, doing something is better than doing nothing. If keeping your event semi-advertised makes it possible to run at all, then it's worthwhile for now. So we could use the usual method of flyers, emails, libcal, and social media, but we could also adjust these methods slightly as well. So we could rephrase things to avoid buzzwords. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of backlash coming from specific groups and often specific groups outside of your community. So if they're searching the terms drag storytime, they might not find your event in the results if it's called Queen Jade's Fabulous Storytime or something like that. Another method is to continue forward and emphasize why the event really matters, and to push the values of equity. If you are not in a safe environment to do so, you can try other methods. You could use offline advertising to ensure your events stay in your existing community. This limits your event as outreach, but don't forget that many LGBT organizations have listservs, so they could privately advertise the event. So you can feel free to share it with them. Another key point about advertising is that you are in control of your narrative. So don't take backlash as failure. Take it as an opportunity to share your message of valuing your neighbors, all of your neighbors. You can redirect conversations to the positive aspects about hosting your event. And don't forget that you can delete social media comments. It's your page. Make it how you want it to be. So, preparing for backlash. Hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Remember what you're doing this for. You are doing this to welcome people out of the closet, to make them feel welcomed in the community. That's life-saving work. So when it comes to preparing for the worst, however, we'll want to do things like creating a safety plan for the event, including how to lock down the area, making escape routes, ensuring that you have ample staffing, so you can have as many people on hand to do things as needed, and whatever else you might need that day. Make a plan according to your library and what would work for you. Another key tip is to create and communicate plans for staff leading up to the event. Things like how should they handle harassment over the phone, in person? What policies can they lean on? How can they end conversations? Make sure to empower them as much as possible so that this isn't a terrible experience for everyone. And now, the fun stuff. So I have examples of loud and proud outreach. So you can do things like hosting drag story times and pride parades, hanging up pride flags. You can partner with local LGBT organizations, collaborate on events together. I'm sure they have many ideas. You can host an LGBTQIA experiences panel to try to get the dialogue going. You might get some uncomfortable or even harassing questions in that, but if you have people prepared for that and some kind of self-care afterwards, like built into the event, it could be an option. You could host a two-spirit Indigenous speaker. Given that a lot of the current anti-LGBTQ sentiment doesn't know about two-spirit as an identity, you might actually avoid some of the harassment and backlash related to that because they might not know what that is. So it'll just be an entirely new concept, right? You can solicit and share patron stories about how the library welcomed them and how it made a difference in their lives. So that's a bit of political activism to say, hey, the fact that we welcome LGBT people into our library makes such a difference. This person found a book that made them feel less alone, and that was impactful in their life. That matters. Finally, you can offer informational pamphlets such as the Genderbread Person, your local resources, a guide to Pride, stuff like that. Now remember, you don't need to be in an entirely supportive community to pursue equality. So if you need quieter outreach, here are some ideas. You can casually introduce staff pronouns in conversations. I'll just be like, I'm Allie, she, her. And by doing it casually, I can dodge some things sometimes. You can offer pronoun pins. That way it's unmanned and it's just kind of a grab and go situation. That can help. Tabling at pride parades. So I'm recommending that because you will be in a community that supports LGBT people. So you're not necessarily going out there and expecting backlash. You're going somewhere where you're welcomed and where these ideas are welcomed. And it's a great time to bring your library cards and get some signups going. You can also partner with local LGBT organizations, host library card signups in their spaces, things like that. And you can contact legislation to secure rights to host events, select books, and safeguard queer and trans people. And so, that's quieter in the sense that you individually are making a call, setting up a meeting or doing something like that to further the rights of diverse gender and sexualities. You can also offer informational pamphlets. Again, a grab and go is kind of a good way to go about that. Or if nothing else, you can casually correct unkind or harmful behaviors. So Fleming specifically mentions, Fleming is a children and teens librarian, saying things like, you're not the gender police. And by being casual like that, Fleming made a difference in her community. So when you enter the battle of the culture wars, we can unfortunately invite harassment. So how do you protect your queer and trans colleagues through your activism? So again, administration buy-in is key. Make it clear that no staff will lose their jobs in response to any backlash, including responding to backlash by walking away or sharing their thoughts if they're so inclined. Communicate clear steps to staff to empower them on how to handle harassment in a manner that works for them. So empower your staff to be able to walk away, direct it to higher up, have patrons fill out a form, or if they're again so inclined, they can talk with the upset patron if they're so inclined. And finally, by continuing to host these programs, despite the current cultural moment, you are showing your support by standing up for queer and trans people no matter what. And that makes a significant difference in our lives to know that we are welcomed in our library. So, in conclusion, the culture wars have raged on for a long time, which means that queer and trans activism has too. If we stand together in unity, continue queer and trans outreach, we will make a difference, community by community. It is in our power to make the world a better place for all people. That is my very tiny font references slide. All right, so thank you very much. We're going to move on to Q&A.
Great, thank you, Allison. So our first question is, for those of us who do queer-focused events but are not queer, are we qualified?
Yes. Having someone's own voice really does make a difference, but you always want as many people as possible advocating for a minority group. I think just make sure you're seeking out, queer and trans voices to accurately represent the community however you can.
Okay, another question. I agree that cultivating a dialogue can be an effective way to humanize different sides of an argument to each other, but do you have any advice for determining whether the conversation is in good faith? How do you decide when the discussion is no longer productive or good for either party with the library patron dynamic?
I think that's going to vary person to person. For me specifically, if I see people visually seeming irate or angry, they're starting to heat up, I'm going to try to first diffuse the conversation and then change topics or end the conversation there if the dialogue cannot continue in a polite and respectful manner. I think it is up to your individual discretion, of course, because sometimes if somebody says that terrible offensive thing and you can give them a response, sometimes that'll make sense to them and you can change their perspective. However, do you want to go through that? Do you want people, if it's say a public forum, do you want everyone to witness that and potentially experience, secondhand violence in that way?
Okay. And related to that, there's another question that says, how can you have a dialogue with a party that's made up its mind about you and nothing that can be said, no evidence presented will be enough to change their minds?
I think some of what I was talking about when I mentioned the cult-like dynamics, I think that's a lot of what's happening right now is there's a cult-like dynamic with certain groups of the Orthodox impulse. Sure, I can put up the references. Um, um, there is a cult-like dynamic in certain groups of the Orthodox impulse mindset type of people. And I think it depends because when I've tried to do some research into how to help people get out of cults, some of it describes you kind of just have to continue to listen to them and be like a friend to them, and start to slowly challenge their beliefs and ideals. And to some degree, we could do that, but there's only so much of us we have to give, um, especially in a professional setting where we have to act in certain ways. And so I think that um, I would personally focus more on people who might be willing to listen. I have had luck reaching people who seemed like they were hard and fast against queer and trans identities, but then when I was explaining it more to them and pulling it out of the propaganda they had been fed, they were like, "Oh, wait, that's it?" You know? So I think if you want to, you can give it a try and be like, it's nothing that crazy. It's just this. Normalize it. Um, or know to pick your battle and focus on somebody else who might be more willing to listen.
Okay. And how do you recommend setting ground rules on dialogue so it remains productive and it doesn't harm our queer staff members when members of the public, including our own patrons we know, call us groomers for having a rainbow family story time?
Mhm. If you're having an open dialogue, set ground rules like from the beginning. Like, do not wait even a sentence into the conversation or discussion to set them, because people could start to get ideas in their head of like, oh, I'm going to say this, and then get attached to saying something terrible and awful. Um, and so what I would say is set rules that are kind of vague and encompassing, and then make sure you have specific examples. That way, more people can understand what you mean. Things like, okay, we are going to only have conversation in a level-headed manner. We will not accept aggressive, violent, or angry dialogue. We will have to stop the conversation at that moment. So also having those clear boundary settings of, if this happens, this is what we do in that moment, and then you follow through, of course. Um, it's still possible that it will wind up damaging, though, because people will say things and then you have to shut it down. So the thing was already said, the harm was already done, but you can also then redirect the conversation afterwards and say, this is why trans lives matter. This is why it's not this scary other thing that you may have heard on the news somewhere. Um, so again, setting ground rules and redirecting the conversation after a harmful thing was said to empower, to welcome, and to affirm queer and trans identities can be helpful.
Okay. This is from someone in the chat. It says, was just told indirectly that calling patrons, parents, and performers pedophiles or groomers was okay because it wasn't directly harassing. How do we determine harassing when there's a pressure to contain a space for all perspectives? I think a lot about Popper's paradox of tolerance.
Fascinating. I think all perspectives are not welcome. You cannot be tolerant if you tolerate everything. If you tolerate hate, you're not being tolerant of other groups. Like, I believe that's the paradox you're talking about. I'm not familiar myself. Um, but I would say quite unequivocally that's not okay. You can't dehumanize people with that kind of phrasing, especially inaccurate portrayals of who somebody is or what they're doing. Might be one way to go about it. It's completely inaccurate, not a groomer to have a diverse gender identity. That's plain and simple. It's just a different experience in life. Um, if you focus on the facts like that, that could be one way to make that argument. Let's see.
Okay. Would it be helpful for libraries and public media entities to introduce a content disclaimer in programming, provided that it requires people to sign off for being exposed to ideas or concepts different than their own? I'm just thinking that we're in a time where almost everything has no liability sign off for products and content that helps prevent legal harassment.
Interesting. See, my first instinct is if we were to do that for queer trans focused events, then we further otherize it. Um, but I could see where it could reduce liability and keep us afloat for the time being, as we're in the heat of the culture wars right now. That right now, survival might just be what we have to do until we can thrive and flourish again. Um, I don't think I have a good answer myself, if I'm being honest.
Okay. This kind of ties in with that, but given your research on culture wars, what is your long-term outlook on the current culture war?
I truly believe that at least a couple of decades from now, things are going to be okay. will be back out of the closet if we're currently being pushed in. Um, it's just how we're going to get there and what actions are all of us going to take to make a difference now. Also, just to survive and to support one another no matter what. Um, I'm very optimistic considering the amount of um, hate there has been through the past 2 centuries. I'll again recommend um, James Davison Hunter's Culture Wars, the struggle to Define America. This was written in 1991 or published in 1991, still very relevant today, as well as On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, published in 2016, much more modern. But you'll see the amount of terrible hate that we have overcome, like as a country together, through the culture wars. And On Tyranny gives you good advice for what to do right now to survive tyrannical overreaches of power.
Okay. And we do have a question about, will you share your slides so that,
Of course.
or, okay, perfect. So we'll
Sorry.
be able to put those in the resources. And there's no more questions here. I think we can move to our roundtable. We got a few minutes in here. I think we can hit a few questions. Let's see. So just everybody feel free to jump in. So for a fun starting question, please share your 2S LGBTQIA plus I outreach ideas. Like, what are you guys doing in your spaces? Oh, thank you, Kim. Okay. Oh, I love that. Hosting an LGBT party,
Amazing.
hire queer people.
And
Y'all
make
means
a
all.
block party.
I love that. Queer tea hour, scene making. All right, band book read-in. Nice. Two-spirit story time.
These are a lot of amazing programs, and it really just goes to show what a difference we can make, like in no matter what situation we're in. In case no one's told you, I'm proud of all of you for going through with this, no matter what.
It's fun. All right, these are all great, guys. More coming in. All right, and still feel free to put your answers to that in there. I'm going to try to hit a few more questions before we run out of time, but how will you personally make a more queer and trans welcoming library where you work?
We have a lot of amazing things like partnering with Safe Haven, attending programs, having our pronouns in our signature, making all queer and trans people welcome, backing our colleagues who are also LGBTQIA. Nice. Kicking patrons out for hate speech is a great one.
All right, and let those still come through too, but we got another one. Have you tried running an LGBTQ plus focused outreach events? How did they go? Did you receive any adverse responses? How'd you handle those if they did come up?
We have things like tabling at Pride events. Some people are pretty lucky. That's awesome. Local Pride Night and handing out queer giveaway books. Policies, that's where it's at. That's amazing.
Um,
Zines are a great thing to do too.
the Zine Fest sounds great. That would be awesome. All right, thank you guys for those responses. And so if your administration has vetoed your queer or trans event, how did you proceed? And how would you have proceeded differently in hindsight? Directly calling them out?
Great way to do it.
Yeah.
Especially if you can get HR on your side or anything like that. It can make a difference in the policies around, um, hosting these events. I could add in that I've definitely had a lot of vetoed events in this region or in this whenever I try to do like a queer and trans focus event, I've had a lot be vetoed. And if I were to go back to like my younger self who was more timid about things, I probably would have pushed it a lot more. Talked repeatedly to administration about the benefits or the suicide rates that are decreased when we welcome LGBT people into the community, or even just found my LGBT patrons and were like, hey, you guys want to come talk to administration with me about an event? Because that could make a difference too. Yeah, the whataboutisms. That can be difficult. Anyone who's supportive, absolutely.
Great. Yeah, I definitely agree, Melinda. It's a great time for straight allies to be showing up. I just took a class where it wasn't about being allies, it was about being co-conspirators, and I really enjoyed that. I was like, I like that term a lot better because it implies action. Also, oh, awesome, Molly. It's great that you got an official statement. All right, thank you guys for these responses. And yeah, let them keep coming in. We got one more question on this discussion. Let's see. If you are in the queer or trans community, how can your colleagues make the workspace more welcoming to you? Self-education, correct patrons, gender, even just the how are you doing, those really do go far. Um, shield, so- totally agree.
I love that starting a queer employee resource group. That's a great idea. Melody.
Love the idea of a queer book club. That would be awesome. Humility. No.
5 people snacks when you misgender them. Good idea.
And
And on a serious note, training self-defense, having library-wide trainings is a good idea for any library in this day and age.
yeah, I definitely agree. I just stepped into a role as a training librarian and I'm taking notes on all of these guys. Because I feel like it was in the last session that Alex said, you know, in a crisis, you will default to the level of your training. So we have to be making sure that our training is up to par. All right. Does anyone have any more questions for Allison? I think we've reached the end of our discussion questions. Anything else? Oh, okay. We've got one from Alani. Okay, so, okay. All right. Yeah, I think we're coming to the end. All right. So thank you so much, Allison. And thank you to everyone who came out for this session. And thanks also to CERT and RRT members for handling the tech and chat. CERT and RRT are committed to ensuring that all of our programs are diverse, inclusive, and free for attendees. To do so, we rely on support from ALA, membership, and direct donations. You can help champion our Roundtable's mission by donating at the link provided in the chat and or joining CERT as a member. Next up is our final session of the day, A Queer and Present Danger, Protecting Queer and Trans Library Staff, which will start at around 3 p.m. Central Time. So I hope you can join us, and thank you guys again.